Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation podcast. It is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, your MC, Nicolo Grasso, and I am joined today by the number one Bob Fosse fan that I know, Mr. Randy Burrows of the Uncut Gems podcast. How are you doing, Randy? So lovely to have you here.
Oh, look, man, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I always love talking about Fosse, and Cabaret was one of his films that sort of came to me a little bit later. But every time I have an opportunity to watch it, I'm thrilled to do so. So yeah, this is fantastic. Love being here. It's good to see you.
It's amazing to see you, and I honestly could not have done this episode, this recording with anyone else, because of course both you and I have experienced Berlin. You have experienced it more recently. I've been basically almost living there half part-time for the past 2.5 years at this point. It's a city that's very near and dear to my heart, and this year, including some future episodes, I wanted to tackle some stories that are set in Berlin. And one of the quintessential expat narratives that's become almost a cliche at this point amongst foreigners who travel to Berlin is to be obsessed with Christopher Isherwood. Christopher Isherwood, who lived in Berlin for multiple years, who wrote about Berlin in his Berlin novels or Berlin stories, depending on where you're finding them. One, of course, is Mr. Norris Changes Trains, and the other one is Goodbye to Berlin, which would end up becoming the basis for today's topic, 1972's Cabaret by Bob Fosse.
But Sally, you have this appointment, don't you?
I'll cancel it. I love parties.
Good. This is splendid for the practicing. You will introduce me, please.
Yes, of course. Herr Wendel, Fräulein Landauer.
Sehr erfreut, gnädiges Fräulein.
No, English conversation.
I'm so charmed, dearest miss.
And, this is Miss Sally Bowles.
How do you do?
Bobby, Miss Landauer, in my house.
I have written down a mini bio of what Isherwood did when he was living in Berlin. You know, he arrived in 1929. Germany at the time, for listeners who maybe don't know, this is during the Weimar Republic, right after the end of World War One. Germany was in a better state than it would be after the 40s, but still kind of recovering from all the conflict and the violence. But there was a push to have people travel across Germany. The country looked stunning. There was, similar to what was happening in France, there was a revival, a rebirth of the big cities, of this, intersection of cultures. And Berlin especially was seen as this paradise of perverts in a way, this hedonistic haven for people looking for sex, music, passionate affairs, culture, history, food. It was beer, of course. It was uniting so many different people. But during the Weimar Republic, Christopher Isherwood, British writer, young writer, only 27 years old, travels to Berlin and experiences the city in full. He's barely writing the novels he's supposed to be writing because he's just having a lot of experiences. Some of them we might say slightly questionable, including with a 16-year-old teenager. Of course, Christopher Isherwood was a gay writer, openly gay, and Berlin gave him this freedom that he was not really feeling back home in the UK. And here he just met a whole parade of writers who were also in Berlin, having their own experiences, their own adventures. He would meet someone like Jean Ross, who was an aspiring actress that would become a basis for one of the key characters of our story. But most importantly, he was witnessing the rise of Nazis, the rise of fascism, the way Berlin was slowly getting colder, meaner, more dangerous, more violent, more brutal, constant fights. He was also a sympathizer of the Communist Party, and he was seeing how the far right and the far left were constantly clashing, and ultimately he had to flee Berlin. Afterwards, he ended up writing, actually, 2 books primarily. Of course, as we mentioned, Mr. Norris Changes Trains, which is kind of like a very fun novel that I would recommend listeners, and you as well, Randy, check out in the future if you have the opportunity. But of course, he primarily wrote Goodbye to Berlin, based on a lot of his own personal experiences, some fiction, some facts. What are your thoughts, Randy, on this book? What was your experience reading it?
Wow. Okay. So yeah, certainly just in my familiarity with Cabaret, the film, I knew of the Christopher Isherwood book, and we talked about Cabaret a couple years ago on Uncut Gems, and
Hmm.
Isherwood came up during that conversation. But this was my first opportunity to read this, and I ordered it before Christmas, and I read it over Christmas, and I'm sort of fascinated by the book, a number of things. In some ways, like I go through this and I gotta admit, I feel a little bit stupid. There's a lot of detail in here. There are a lot of characters in here. And it's so well written. But I know I'm not catching everything. And I know that by the time I get to the end, I'm forgetting things from the beginning because it doesn't really have any type of a traditional narrative. So I think
Hmm.
Isherwood's approach to this is very much like a people watching pleasure. That's sort of what it is, right? Like it's a journal or very very diary writing in its style. And this is like what is it, 6 chapters, and each chapter is sort of a block from Isherwood's time in Berlin, and each of these blocks sort of represents um, an aspect of German and Berlin society during these years. And just when you look at, just these different time blocks of, the chapters of his diaries, it forms a picture sort of at, by the time you get to the end, that's when you see the evolution. Like the first chapters is he arrives and he's living, just he's boarding in a boarding house, and there are a number of other boarders in there. And then the second chapter is devoted to his experiences with this character, Sally Bowles. And then he goes on a bit of a vacation on sort of an island, not quite a resort, but it's a very,
Hmm.
nice, pleasant resort type of atmosphere where he's just sort of chilling out. So each one of these chapters is sort of revealing about the types of people. So you were talking about the Weimar era, sort of post Great War, and through the 1920s. And this was a time that like in North America, it was called the Roaring Twenties because there was so much development and
Yeah.
technology, industrial revolution, like all this stuff was kicking in. People's lives were they were improving, and there was a lot more, like art, film was becoming a thing in Hollywood and in Germany, because I think this is sort of this is where you get, Metropolis, and you get investment into experimental arts, including film. So, Metropolis and Fritz Lang and some of these characters come out of this scene too. And and with it, music, and the wild nightlife. And so this is sort of a fascinating piece to me. But the days are numbered because we see this as a bit of an era, and we spend a lot of time with Sally Bowl, for instance, and we'll talk about her more because she's the centerpiece of Cabaret, of course. But
Hmm.
these characters, whom Isherwood, as the writer, who he's talking about, they tend to represent elements of society. Like I think it's the landlady that rents the room to him. Is it Schneider or Schroeder?
Schroeder.
Schroeder,
Fräulein
right?
Schroeder.
So she's sort of interesting, even though it's not that she does a lot, but so many of these characters, I think they're archetypes, right? So when you
Yeah.
see her and she talks, she talks one way about, just she speaks. She's a fair weather commentator. So whoever's in power, I think there's a comment where she voted communist in the recent election, but then she has some boarders who are anti-communist, so she completely changes her tone. And I think Isherwood makes a comment that if someone asked her how she voted, she probably would have forgotten that she had voted communist. So she's very much, just sort of leaning towards whichever way the wind is going. And like that's sort of an interesting piece, because I think ultimately, just through this approach that Isherwood has, um, is that we see how people behave when the world is changing around them. It's not a
Hmm.
story of the main characters not really experiencing the world changing. It's not the story of that politics, but when you step back from it, the picture that forms is entirely that politics and that history lesson on that era. And I just think it's just such a layered and deep text, and there's so much going on. Like any character that's in here probably represents some sort of demographic, right? So what the farmers and the doctors and the professionals, like everyone who shows up here represents a certain slice of life from that time. And we're
Hmm.
always ever with Isherwood, but we spend significant amount of times in different classes, right? Like we spend time with the Landauers and Bernhard Landauer, and we spend time with
The
Jewish
Novaks.
citizens, and some who aren't, the Novaks. That's sort of a great chapter, and that's class because they're dirt poor. God love them. Um, so, and no one necessarily does a lot. It's not something that you can really easily trace with your finger and follow the rising action. And here's an exciting event, and here's where something changed.
Hmm.
And not really. Um, but each of these sort of journal entry chapters along the way, when you pull back from it, you do get a little bit of how Isherwood has changed and how the times are changing, even within this 3-4 year window. And I find that fascinating. I find it just, a lovely look. As much as it is about the city, it's also about the time, the era. And I think it's something that resonates a lot today because in this time in
Yes. Oh
Berlin,
God.
in this time in Berlin, you have people that are just living up life. They're enjoying film, and they're enjoying going out. They're enjoying the nightlife, and they're enjoying going out to listen to singing. They enjoy taking like a 3-week vacation. Meanwhile, politics is happening, lives are changing, and attitudes are shifting, in the social conscious. But these characters don't live it all the time. Like Isherwood refers to it every now and then, and the whole approach is that I'm just sort of watching. This is what I see. I'm a visitor, and I'm just sort of observing. Like I say, people watching. Just sort of see how Berliners go about their business and
Hmm.
their lives. But he does sort of zigzag and goes in and out of a number of different demographics, and as he observes, I'd say he changes a little bit too. Like I get the sense that, sort of he's changing, but you do have this sense of, it's just I'm watching how all these other people behave. And then if you sort of refocus your eyes and look behind them, focus on what's behind them, there's quite a story there. And most
Hmm.
of the people in front, these characters in front, aren't really paying attention, and that's going to catch up to them. And just knowing our history, we know that this is a dreadful horror that would follow. And insofar as I think that it's pertinent to today, like you just feel that there's a lot of anxiety amongst different groups, but some people remain oblivious to things that are going on in the world that would be concerning, things that are impacting us now in the economy and geopolitics that weren't affecting us 10, 15 years ago. Like it's a different world, but there are still people out there oblivious, and I think this story, like, so Isherwood's writing, and then Cabaret as well, um, they are just a fascinating look at how people are caught up in themselves and fail or aren't able to sort of broaden their view to have an understanding of the community that they live in, right? We all
Yep.
pine for connection. The characters in here, they pine for connection. They want connection, most of them. And, some of them, it's, just very deeply rooted on, how much they need other people, and they need their community, and they need, to connect with other people. Meanwhile, the community on large isn't getting along, right? Things are falling apart as the economy worsens, and certain industries are falling apart, and
Hmm.
some groups are getting angry with other groups and starting to blame, and hatred
Big
starts to,
fights in
to
the
bubble up.
street.
And so it's fascinating, just to sort of read this and then sort of consider the context. Like I say, like I feel there's so much by way of detail in here that I can't really easily reflect and call upon. Like if you were to ask me about a certain character, I like, ooh, shoot, which one was that? But there's so much depth. I bet like if you go back and you were to look at Fritz and I'm even forget like even the doctor on the beach, like he was he was a very sort of stern and had these ideas, small character, but I bet you like he represents like an attitude or that type of middle upper level professional at the time. Like everyone is sort of an archetype. So I just think it was a fascinating and really layered read. Yeah, so quite liked it. Quite liked it, and will return to it because I feel that there is more. There's more to get out of it. So yeah, that was my experience. I rambled there, but I think I could probably
All
ramble
good.
more. Like it's a lovely text, easy to read. Um, Although you can sort of say, well, it's hard to follow, but at the same time, I think you have to have sort of the perspective that when you take all the journal entries and step back, that's when you've got this sort of tapestry that forms. So I'm really was really really impressed with it. What about you?
I'm I'm very happy to hear that. It warms my heart. This was actually my second time reading the book. I first read it in 2023. I don't even remember why. I think because that's when I was starting to go to Berlin more and more. It just felt natural to finally read it. I'd heard of it. I'd watched the movie already a couple of times,
I know it didn't work out
and
for you to join us on our cabaret show when we talked
I
about
know. I think it
cabaret.
might have been even around that time, actually, like
Okay, were
2023,
you
maybe
were
even.
you? Yeah, I sort of forget. I wonder maybe if you were doing some homework in case you could join us.
I don't remember, yeah, but I remember listening to that episode actually. I know the good Jakub,
It was a good
the
chat.
host of the Uncut Gems podcast. Yeah, he doesn't love some parts of the movie, but we'll get to it. Um, but with this book, I was really blown away the
Hmm.
first time reading it. I was not expecting it to be, like you mentioned, such an easy read in terms of just like words on a page type of easy. Like, oh my god, like I find myself reading 20, 30 pages at a time without even having to focus on it or force myself. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna just sit down and read two chapters. It just comes naturally. It's so deceptively simple, but really, really engaging. There's something to be said about the way that it's structured episodically while still maintaining this passage of time. Like it starts in autumn of 1930, it ends with the winter of 1942, 1943, right before Isherwood, the character, leaves. But what I particularly want to add to what you said, because I pretty much agree with everything you mentioned, to be honest, I think what I find fascinating is the hindsight that's inherent of Isherwood writing this in 1939, or at least like publishing it in 1939, because he didn't write those stories as he was in Berlin, even though it opens with a Berlin diary and it closes with a Berlin diary. Those were written after the fact.
Hmm.
So for him to know, oh my god, okay, this was the preamble to war. This is before Poland was invaded. This is before, the coup d'etat. This is before everything that happened. He inserts enough sprinkles of information of social context, political context throughout the book without feeling like a forced wink and nod.
Hmm.
Like sometimes we watch some movies from the 1940s, 1930s, or even movies nowadays where they love to have like constant nudges of like, hey, we know Hitler is gonna be here, so like making jokes about people who are very tiny and angry or who have mustaches, things like that. I find it to be quite annoying in pop culture whenever they do that.
Hmm.
In here, those elements are so matter of fact that it makes it even more disturbing to read because
Hmm.
you're just seeing regular life. Like if you could like if you remove the, I mean, which is hard to do in a way, but if you remove the Nazi element and update everything to now, let's say it's Berlin 2026, okay, I know people who are struggling artists who want to break out. I know people who work, it would be in tech industries now instead of working in like a big factory or owning a factory, you'd be owning like a tech startup,
Hmm.
who's doing AI jobs and whatever, and you're the upper class. And it's all of those things of constantly trying to survive the best you can. Isherwood himself, and as well as the character, had to do lessons, had to teach English to survive, to afford to drink and live a decent life in Berlin. And all of those elements are so relatable in a way that anyone who's ever been to a big city, at least a European city, I can speak from my personal experiences from some friends. I don't even know actually how much that differs from life in a big city like in Montreal or a Toronto or a New York or Chicago or whatever, because there's something about the way that North American cities, large cities at least, are just so hard to navigate.
Hmm.
Instead, here you can even feel it in this book. One of the things that people love to do, big fans of Isherwood, is just like track down all those places. Like, oh, he's talking about Nollendorf Platz, and we can actually
Yeah.
find his house, number 17. People do pilgrimages there, and they're going to the zoo, and they're going to this square, and they're going to this other part, and they take the underground, and they're taking the trains, and they're taking the buses and the taxis. It feels all so lived in, so believable, so real, so tangible, because it is at the end of the day. And it's so vibrant without feeling cartoonish, without feeling exaggerated. I think you are spot on with the people watching that Isherwood does. Not even just people watching, people judging. Is
Hmm.
constantly picking up on, I mean, of course, the fictional character, but he's picking up on specific tics, specific ambitions, ways that they look at other people, ways that they speak, the ways that they move around the world that surrounds them. He's already feeling like, oh, you can tell this person has been insecure most of their life and they're making up for it now. Or you can feel that
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
one feels like he's always been owed everything in life and he barely looks at you, he barely throws a glance. All those little details bring everyone to life. It's so it's so good.
It's so authentic, and it's just all these little moments too, which in a way they're just sort of drop away, not throw away. I don't mean that in a sort of mean type of way, but like there's somewhere in there. I think Isherwood is talking. He looks out the window, and there's a little bit of a uh, kerfuffle down on the street. Just down the street a little ways because people are going to the bank, and that more or less that's
Mhm.
all that's said. Like people are upset and they're going to the bank and there's a line at the bank and there's a bit of a kerfuffle. Um, and then sort of the story moves on somewhere else, right? Just but that's a very specific drop, right? So he's dropping that to sort of drop the idea of unrest and people can't get their money. And so it sort of led me, like I guess the reason why I remember that particular drop a little bit is because so okay, what was going on here? And then I was just sort of reading a little bit about 1930 and some of the events that led to the rise of the Nazi Party.
Mhm.
The economy fell in the toilet in October 29th, 1929. I think that was the date the Great Depression started, and that was a worldwide thing. And I think that I don't know too much about just sort of the economy in Germany at the time, but I'm going to say it was probably a little bit more volatile, having sort of come out of the First World War and then gone
Barely a
through
decade.
gone through a bit of a resurgence and development and just sort of a reestablishment of German identity and but two things go in waves and this again like it ties to as you said like its relevance today because I just feel like since the pandemic, it just seems like there's so many weird things that are going on and there's just so many different like society is just they're apart, right? Like it's a very divisive culture that we live in and just sort of people line up in their little groups and they end up being dissatisfied. Like people on the political left are upset with people on the political right. People on the political right are upset with people on the political left. Um, so it's, and then what happens, and we hindsight being such a thing in here, like we know the devastation and the horror that happens in Europe and in the 1940s, but how can one not see that sort of going on now with what's going on with countries like United States and Russia, where you've got leaders that are tapping into a frustrated society, and they're playing people against one another. So people go in waves, and there's good times, the economy's goes up and it goes down, and you have recessions, and you have bull markets and bear markets, and there's always people struggling, but sometimes generally times are good, and the 20s were generally good. And so then you also get to this this end of a wave of good times, which sort of happens in economics anyway. But the 1930s were so devastating, just in terms of finances, markets. But then you've also had about a decade of people living their lives and then settling in and just being dissatisfied, putting on their grumpy pants, which I think is sort of a thing, right? Like people are gonna bitch and complain about what's going on. But you've got the Nazi Party capitalizing on that anger and sort of pitting people against one another. And it's the politics of blaming. Oh, you know what? Minorities, Jews, all these different groups that aren't sort of the core main group, they're a problem. And people can identify, oh, times are bad, but you've got someone that comes out of the woodwork and says, yeah, times are bad. I get it. And you know what? It's those guys' fault. And it's those guys' fault. And it's those guys' fault. It's all these little minorities. And then political parties can rise with that type of sentiment. And I'm going to say that's the sentiment that, drove Trump's election and, got him in twice. I'm going to say too that there's that element in Canada right now, a little bit with the Conservative Party, part of the Conservative Party. They're sort of an angry group, and I get that. And we live in a climate where that's heightened maybe by social media and just having more of an awareness of everything that's going on in the world. But I see this stuff on the news, and I see this stuff happening, and I see it in this book, right?
Yeah.
And it is sort of alarming to sort of read. And so at times in here, it's alarming that no one really cares. Like Sally in particular, and Otto, those characters don't get it, don't care. Now, mind you, they're also
They
very
live in their
young.
own little world.
They live in their own little world. Now, mind you, in fairness to them, I think Sally's 19 or something, and Otto is 16, 17. Like they're very young. And they're just getting out on their own for the first time. But man, things are happening around them, and they are totally not aware, totally not prepared. And that's sort of a frightening thing.
Yeah, you see them on this side of the spectrum. You also see just so much apathy, which is also something that's taken advantage of by the Nazis in this case, where there's, especially as the book goes on, which is again part of the brilliance of it for me, is how slowly you see things getting worse. It's almost imperceptible, and it's so banal. It's so slow. It's like, yeah, like there's a mention here, there's a mention there, and you get to the point where there's just like Nazis get picking fights on the street, and there's beatings, and the people are just standing on the side like shaking their heads. No one's intervening.
Oh,
No one's
yeah,
stopping
yeah.
anything. No one's calling the police. I mean, the police is half as bad as the
Yeah,
Nazis at that
in
point,
some
basically.
cases, there's one. I remember there's one moment where I forget what the crime was, but it was happening, and the police were watching. Like as Isherwood
Yeah,
talks about, the police just let it happen.
yeah. They're like just like letting it go, letting it be, and the people themselves, they don't do anything, because also what can they do? You don't want to compromise yourself. You're just going through your life. You see it, you don't agree with it, but then You just, you make your own moral stance personally, internally, but you don't actually fight for it. You don't fight for change. You don't fight
Yeah.
for anything. And that's how ultimately whatever happened. And you see it. I love that you mentioned them, Fräulein Schroeder earlier as well. There is that part that you said that really did hit me even on this rewatch, where Isherwood does say something like she even believes what she's saying of herself. Like she voted, she was very pro-communist and she voted for them. And then this time around, like she fully believes that she never would have done that, and that no, this is the right thing to do. The Nazi Party is the one to vote for. Those are the good guys. And what is even more troubling is that at this point, like even Germany right now is not in the best of spots. They have the AfD, the AfD at the
Yeah.
top of,
Yeah.
of the
Like
of
the
the
same
voting.
thing is happening. Yeah.
We are seeing it in Italy again, Spain, Portugal, France, Canada now, the States, of
Hmm.
course, like so many parts of the world, of the Western world, we're seeing this happen. And meanwhile, at the time of recording, like it's early January, this will come out a bit later on, but we're seeing rising protests in other in Middle East. We're seeing protests in South Americas, where people who have been under dictatorships and under far right regimes are trying to escape from them and fight for them. And we have already been through this. We have been out of it. And you're really like, you want to yell at those characters in this book, being like, just do something.
Hmm.
Like you don't know what's happening. You don't know what's gonna happen. You don't know. I don't know. Like 10 years later, like where are the Novaks? Are they just like dead? All of them, because they could barely afford to have like decent housing. Does the guy, probably the guy goes, Otto goes into like a youth party or whatever, with the Nazis to get some money? I can totally picture him being that type of person who's like, I need an easy job.
Yeah.
Push comes to shove, I'm forced by the situation to just do something, and he does the worst possible thing. The Landauers and their situation with being Jewish, and already facing repercussions for that, in the early 30s. Like, do they just flee, all of them, Germany? Can they do that? It's bleak.
Yeah, it's incredibly bleak, and just as sort of a normal Joe in society now, and I think you're right. All the Western countries are sort of dealing with this, right? Like we go through these waves, and I have to think that
Yeah.
things like social media and um, sort of amplifies it, right? It allows you to sort of pick your little community, and then within it, you just sort of end up yelling what you believe as opposed to talking amongst
Echo
yourselves. And
chambers.
yeah, and then that when that sort of comes out of the little community, it's you get a lot more divisiveness and hostility, um, and I don't know really what one has to do to correct that. But this book is a is a reminder of um, that's what the society was like. In Germany, you didn't have social media amplifying things, but you had a community that was starting to feel pressure, and you have a party to rise up that takes advantage of the fact that people are angry. And and they're not offering solutions, they're offering policies based on just these angry ideas, right? So
Hmm.
um anyway, yeah, so like you see these types of things now, and it's very concerning and stressful, especially when you hear about polls, and the polls of in different countries. Like I know ADF or AFD in Germany.
AFD.
AFD, like they're
AFD.
polling really well, and aren't I think there are elections this year, aren't there? So, cause for concern there, and yeah, so it is sort of frustrating, because like now, if I consider myself sort of an Isherwood type of guy, that I'm just sort of watching everything happen, and I'm okay personally. Um, but what's the tipping point, right? Like where you have to say, no, you got to take a stand,
Hmm.
because things went too far in Nazi Germany, and where enough people didn't take a stand, and the Hitler was able to, just sort of take control over, policing and everything within Germany. And at a certain point, he, he there wasn't anything anyone could do.
Yeah, yeah,
You're beyond the point of any type of return.
yeah. And one thing that's also key, I think, to both. I mean, both Isherwood, the real person, but especially like Isherwood, the character, is that at the end of the day, this doesn't really affect him. And you do kind of feel that in the book, like he's just
Hmm.
witnessing all those things, but he's not directly involved in any of this. He's just a silent witness, we could almost say, of the slow deterioration and decadence that's hitting the
Yeah.
country, that's hitting Berlin especially, because Berlin is a city of immigrants. As I mentioned, like this intersection of cultures, and because of that, it's a more intellectual city, you could say. You have more variety of opinions and of personalities, and most of the people that he meets, if they're not German, they are from other countries or Austria or whatever. They're all coming from abroad, and so some of those things are alien to them, and they're so far apart that at the end of the day, what does he do? Things are getting bad. You know what? Peace out. I'm going home.
Hmm.
The people of Berlin, that's their home. they cannot they cannot
Yeah.
escape, and escape is not a solution. Escape is not bringing anything good. Of course, it's good for your own personal self. Oh, I'm getting out of harm's way because God knows what's going to happen. There's very, very, very subtle mentions of him being gay in the
Hmm.
book. He's a borderline like asexual character. There's like advances that Sally does on him, but he kind of refutes her. Um, but there's some references here and there that if you know who Isherwood was, it's like, oh, okay, like this is even the whole chapter on the island and the
Hmm.
relationship between Otto and the other
Absolutely. Yep.
guys. Like this is so close to being explicitly like a homosexual relationship. Um, but at the end of the day, yeah, he just leaves, and he can afford to leave. And the people who stay, I mean, they could leave. They can travel. We know, of, like for instance, Billy Wilder's family.
Hmm.
They they left, but it's not an easy thing to do. It's not sustainable. It's not, especially if you don't know the language.
Yeah.
If you don't have anyone anywhere else that can host you and support you and help you out. So there, for a book that is this vibrant, this colorful, even fun at times. Like, to be honest, it's a fun book. There's a lot of humor.
Yeah.
There's a lot of intentionally funny parts in here, and memorable bits and characters. But you get to those final chapters, those final two chapters, it's hard to even crack a smile because you do feel the weight of everything.
And this comes from that exact perspective, I want to say. The fact that, he is separated from it. Like, I think the famous line in this book, which did become a play in addition to a musical, but like,
Yeah.
I am camera, right? I am a camera. I think it's somewhere in the first page, but that is sort of like the famous line from here. I am a
I can
camera,
read it if you
constantly
want, actually, have
recording.
it written down.
I have it somewhere. Yeah, if you have it, go for it. It's somewhere on the
I
first
am a
page.
cam I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording,
Recording.
not thinking. Recording the man shaving at the
Yep.
window opposite and the woman in the kimono washing her hair. Someday, all this will have to be developed, carefully printed, fixed.
Yeah, so I don't know if Isherwood maybe even realized what a strike of genius that is from like a perspective piece, right? So
Hmm.
because he is an outsider, because we do watch everything relatively objectively. Like I would say, like he himself, he's tested and impacted by things. Like he, at one point he calls Sally a bitch. So he's not totally devoid of his own opinions, but largely it is like on his shoulder through whom we experience uh Berlin. And
Yep.
it's through this there's sort of this third party, almost mostly impartial look that we get, his descriptions of what's going on around him, because he's not engaged fully in the lives of these characters. Like I say, like none of these characters really have arcs. They're archetypes. Things might happen to them, but they're all sort of archetypes. So because we have this description of these characters, um, that's what tells the story, and it's quite impressive actually. But this comes from his mostly impartiality. So and then, like you said, the last couple chapters, because it's a description of how the Novaks are living, or it's a description of meeting Bernhard and seeing how he's dressed, and how he's falling apart. You get these descriptions. um, it it creates an incredibly somber, bleak mood. But
Mhm.
it's not by explain, oh well, the gray sky, and the all all the birds had left for the summer, they're gone now as the autumn rolls in with all of its gloomy. No, there's none of that. It's just you're living with this family in an attic, and they have two rooms, and you've got two and a half people on each bed, and they're tripping over one another to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And the mom is sick, and she's constantly trying to make this ratty little attic a home. um, and there's friction within the family. It just feels cramped and bleak and unfortunate. And you get similar, just sort of descriptions of people's lives, right? Just like he's recording. This is what I'm recording at this moment. So yeah, it's through this perspective, I think, that you get this really unique story. And because he himself doesn't really have a character arc either, uh,
No,
really,
he
but
just gets fed up with the city in a
yeah,
way.
yeah, and yeah, and he's a little bit more vocal and at times, but mostly he's not necessarily on a journey. It's not like, oh, is Isherwood ever going to finish that book? That's not what it's about. It's about taking these journal entries, putting them all side by side, stepping back and say, oh my God, that creates quite a picture.
Yeah, yeah. Do you actually have a favorite quote or passage from the book, or is it the "I am camera" one?
That's a great line, and I think that that's sort of a great piece. I have a couple pieces here, yeah, because I do. Let's see. One. Okay, so this is sections. This is in the Novaks. Yeah, the Novaks. So in this section, Isherwood is living with the Novaks, who are this poor family, and yeah. So I have a couple paragraphs here. 2 years ago, Frau Novak had bought a little suit and an overcoat for Otto, the son, for 300 marks. The suit and the overcoat had been worn out long ago, but the money was not nearly repaid. Shortly after my arrival, Frau Novak invested in clothes for Greta, so that's the sister, to the value of 75 marks. The tailor made no objection at all. The whole neighborhood owed the tailor money. Yet he was not unpopular. He enjoyed the status of a public character whom people curse without any real malice. Perhaps Lothar's right. So this is the other son, who is a Nazi. Perhaps Lothar's right, Frau Novak would sometimes say. When Hitler comes, he'll show these Jews a thing or two. They won't be so cheeky then. But when I suggested that Hitler, if he got his own way, would remove the tailor altogether, then Frau Novak would immediately change her tone. Oh, I shouldn't like that to happen. After all, he makes very good clothes. Besides, a Jew will always let you have time if you're in difficulties. You wouldn't catch a Christian giving credit like he does. You ask people around here, Herr Christoph, they'd never turn out the Jews. So just by through this little interaction and this little scenario, you get the picture that you have multiple faiths, you have multiple cultures, you have multiple classes all interacting, and they form a community, right? And so maybe you tease the guy down the block, or a little sideways glance, but there's nothing malicious. Like, oh, everyone owed him money, right? So, oh gosh, he's so cheap, and everyone owes him money. Like, so you make these little digs, but nothing malicious, right? It's just people in a community. Um, but then Isherwood suggests that when Hitler comes, he'd get rid of them altogether, and then, oh, well, yeah, I wouldn't want that. So I think it just like that's sort of an example that sort of jumped out to me.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
how it's scenario based, but it really does create quite a picture.
I
Um,
mean, it's the type of things you hear all the time from people, or we all ever someone who's a bit too racist, but not like violently racist, but just like, I
Right.
don't know, structurally racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like making specific jokes, specific comments that imply and could bring proper violence, further violence, and deportations and
Yeah.
all of that. Like, God, everything that's happening with ICE right now as well.
Look, it's
But
scary stuff. And actually, like, I have another one. Do you mind if I do another one here?
please do,
Yeah.
please do.
Okay. Awesome. Because so this is from a Berlin diary. This is actually coming up upon the final pages of the book. All at once, the three SA men came face to face with a youth of 17 or 18, dressed in civilian clothes, who was hurrying along in the opposite direction. I heard one of the Nazis shout, "That's him!" And immediately all three of them flung themselves upon the young man. He uttered a scream and tried to dodge, but they were too quick for him. In a moment, they had jostled him into the shadow of a house entrance and were standing over him, kicking him and stabbing him with the sharp metal points of their banners. All this happened with such incredible speed that I could hardly believe my eyes. Already the three SA men had left their victim and were barging their way through the crowd. They made for the stairs, which led up to the station of the overhead railway. Another passer-by and myself were the first to reach the doorway where the young man was lying. He lay huddled crookedly in the corner, like an abandoned sack. As they picked him up, I got a sickening glimpse of his face. His left eye was poked at half out, and blood poured from the wound. He wasn't dead. Somebody volunteered to take him to the hospital in a taxi. By this time, dozens of people were looking on. They seemed surprised, but not particularly shocked. Surprise, so that's gross, right? Uh, well, happens. This sort of thing happened too often nowadays. Allerhand, they murmured. 20 yards away at the Potsdamerstrasse corner stood a group of heavily armed policemen. With their chests out and their hands on their revolver belts, they magnificently disregarded the whole affair. Gross, right? So this is, systemic. This is systemic disregard for the life and welfare of another human being, the systemic
Hmm.
racism that's in there. Um, and this is a throwaway moment. It's two paragraphs that Isherwood, sort of talks about his stroll on a given day. And we don't know those characters. It just sort of happened to him. But this paints a picture of the decay that's happening in society, and
Hmm.
that hate and just the divisiveness has turned into a power play of one group over another, and that power play is based on blaming. It's not based on a policy of fixing things. It's based on, well, we're going to blame people and take our actions authoritatively, based on blame. And so yeah, that sort of stirred me, and it's one of a few examples, because I was sort of underlining a couple passages in the last
Yeah.
20 or 30 pages, because it does get, grimmer and grimmer and grimmer.
Yeah, I have a quote that actually plays into this, which is from the chapter on the Landauers. It was like
Hmm.
primarily focused on the daughter Natalia. And after she officially leaves, after a friendship with Isherwood and everything, things are getting much worse for Jews in Germany and in Berlin. She leaves, and the line goes, "I thought of Natalia. She has escaped, none too soon perhaps. However often the decision may be delayed, all these people are ultimately doomed. This evening is the dress rehearsal of a disaster. It is like the last night of an epoch." Which is when you start
Hmm.
getting all the riots in the streets, and then the Jewish establishments are destroyed or burned. It's Yeah, it's the camera witnessing all of this happening, and already knowing that it's only going to get worse, it's not going to get better. And again,
Yeah.
like what we were saying before, some people can afford to leave, they leave, but many just couldn't.
Yeah. And I think it's a
And we know
different
what
book.
happened
If
to them.
I think it's a different book, like to what you were saying earlier. If Isherwood has more stakes, if we, care about, okay, well, if we discuss more what's keeping him there, if we have those
Hmm.
conversations more. No, but it is more so like he's recording these events and just sort of like reporting, like he's just reporting these. It's a different book, and it's very compelling
Yeah,
perspective.
like you never really know why he comes to Berlin outside of like wanting to be in the city, which is a valid enough reason. It's, I don't want to say is shallow in that way, but it is real, right? It's like, oh, I'm coming here because I just like what the city offers. And by the end of the book, the city is not offering that anymore, and
Mm.
that's when I leave. If anything, it's offering
Do
the
you
opposite, we could
do you
say.
think it's the queer community? Like without it ever being said, I wonder. Like here's a young man, like he's what did you say? He's 27 when he wrote this, and I get we get
27
the
when he went to Berlin,
and we get the
because I think
impression
he's
that's
from
about what
like,
age
yeah,
probably he is here. But it's probably this community that he's seeking. That's why he's there.
yeah,
Makes
yeah, yeah, yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And even just even the types of nightlife is very similar but slightly different from the one you would have in Paris, for instance, which was the other hub in
Right.
Europe that people gravitated towards during the 20s. Um, so yeah, no, it's interesting for sure, and of course, I think this is also actually a good point to also transition into the film adaptation with a very, I promise, super brief intermission on the musical itself, because of course, before Cabaret was a film directed by Bob Fosse, it was a stage musical. As you mentioned, there was a play by John Van Druten called I Am a Camera, which was from 1951, and that was based on Goodbye to Berlin. And in 1966, we have Cabaret by John Kander, lyrics by Fred Ebb, and book by Joe Masteroff, which essentially readapts I Am a Camera and takes parts from other Isherwood stories as well, and turns it into this decadent musical about Berlin at the end of the 1920s, 1929, 1930. Um, it follows similar characters to the ones we see in the book. Uh, it's a proper stage musical where you have, there's this setting of the cabaret with a MC that's introducing these songs and taking part in these numbers where he's cross dressing and doing all kinds of things. But also you have songs outside of the cabaret, following the character of Sally Bowes, following the character of Florence Schneider, and her love interest. It's a big musical. There's a lot of songs, way more songs than I was expecting. The only version, of course, is kind of easy to watch if you don't go to the theater, and even then, at this point, so much of the musical of Cabaret has been corrupted, some would say, apparently, by the film itself. New songs were added in the film. They now are present in most adaptations of the stage musical itself. Some songs have been moved around in the order. There's all kinds of things and creative liberties that people take. I've seen the 1993 version, directed by Sam Mendes with Alan Cumming as the MC, which I found to be quite impressive as a production. Um, I wish it's something I could experience myself in the future one day. I think we both would like to watch
That
this.
would be awesome. Yeah, yeah.
But then we get to 1972, when Bob Fosse himself actually managed to direct this adaptation. Before we go into all of the details, Randy, just like take it away. I know you're a big Bob Fosse fan. What are your thoughts on this film, and do you have some extra history you wanted to share with us?
I don't necessarily have a lot of history with Cabaret. I've seen it 3 or 4 times now.
That's a good
But
number of viewings, I'd
that's a
say.
good number of viewings, and I'll say all of them in the last 4 or 5 years. I think I only saw it for the first time maybe during the pandemic. So, um, yeah. So my connection to Bob Fosse is via All That Jazz. Like All That Jazz, if for me is a film that just continues to give, and it's very, very special um, effort by a man to sort of tell the story of his own demise, and it's the best biopic ever. But at any rate, I find that Bob Fosse was a very interesting creative, and so his creative life, especially once he got in became successful on Broadway, and with film, I think his his artistic drive came from this idea of always thinking he was a failure, and I just think he just has this fascinating fascinating psychology that drove him. And then meanwhile, he did have some moments, in terms of being like a bit of a dirtbag, right? Like he was not
Hmm.
good to the women in his life, and he took them for granted. But when he was working creatively on something, like he was all in, and there was an emotional connection to what he was doing. So with Cabaret, Cabaret comes to Bob Fosse, and he fought pretty hard to be part of that. I think the producer, I want to say Cy Fewer, I don't have the name in front of me, um, but uh, he was looking for someone else, and Fosse, he really auditioned and fought hard for this, and ultimately got it, because prior to this, Fosse had done Sweet Charity, which was, I'll say, a little bit more of a traditional musical. It was an adaptation from a Broadway musical, but it had the same dance numbers and what have you. But I think after that experience, and probably even after the sort of development of film in the late 60s, early 70s,
Hmm.
that like the new Hollywood is starting now. And I now sort of hold the belief, because on Uncut Gems we've been going through Mike Nichols content, and Mike Nichols is one of the forefathers of the new Hollywood. And I think that there are a lot of voices from Broadway that become, mainstays in the new Hollywood, including actors like Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman and Robert Duvall. And so a lot of these names are big, theater people. So Broadway has an immense influence on projects and investment in Hollywood at the time. And Mike Nichols, at the forefront of that, was always a bit of a competitor to Fosse. I think they professionally, they weren't friends per se, from what I understand, but they were always
Okay.
rivals. So if you remember in All That Jazz, the John Lithgow character is like this rival director. So there's a
Hmm.
couple there's a couple directors out there that Fosse considered to be his contemporaries and his rivals, and Mike Nichols was one of them. And they're sort of embodied in this John Lithgow character. So I think in a way, Fosse like admired what Nichols was doing, and he really enjoyed the potential that film could have to tell his stories. And after the experience of having one film under his belt, even though it was a flop, and it's certainly a more traditional musical, people break it into song and stuff, he really wanted to tell something like emotional, with a lot of gravity and weight and heft. And I don't think he ever on stage produced, directed, or choreographed Cabaret. I don't think he was ever involved with the stage production of
I
it.
don't believe so either. Yeah.
But this is one he saw a lot of potential in. And so to me, Cabaret it's sort of the new Hollywood musical. So we're getting rid of the Olivers, the sort of the big budget Sound of Musics. Yes, they were big hits, but I think the studios knew that was ending, right? So Hollywood was in a bit of a slump, and things like The Graduate and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Midnight Cowboy and Bonnie and Clyde. These are the types of films that are actually making quite a bit of buck. And so Fosse really wanted to get in and tell a story his way, and really experiment and play with cinema. So um, with with the whole concept of Cabaret, he makes a number of choices that are very, very, anti-musical. As much as it's a musical, it's, like he's making choices that no one ever has made a choice like this in terms of a musical, right? Like filming all these musical scenes in a cramped on a cramped stage with an audience. Like they're in a basement somewhere. They're in a fairly small space. They have 13
Yeah.
feet of space. But within that, Fosse was fascinated, because he and his films are some of the best edited films ever. And what he is finding on stage, as he's shooting these dance sequences with these performers, and he's capturing the minutia of his choreography, because he can do close-ups. No one has ever really spent time on close-ups with dance numbers. So you have these shots of, it, you can't really tell what the shot is, and then all of a sudden, like, a head pops up, to the beat, and they're in close up and in perfect focus, or you have close ups of hands snapping their fingers, and so you have close ups of these small little movements, and this is what he can do on that stage in the Kit Kat Club, right? Like on stage, and there's all this choreography on chairs where people are just slapping the ground and posing, right? So like he's really, really in his element, and in some ways, like it drove some of the people that I think he worked with crazy because he really wanted to explore and get something perfect. And if you were in this scene, if you were involved with this scene as another creative, a choreographer or an actor or a dancer, then he was relatively open to collaborative ideas and really making it as good as possible. He was also a bit of a slave driver, right? Like he'd work 15-hour days and
Yes.
wouldn't give a shit about you know anyone.
They spent weeks rehearsing this, like
Totally.
weeks and weeks for months on end.
And then he ends up in this little space and he does like parts of scenes over and over and over from different angles, right? So he is it seems to me he's just enthralled with the craft, and then this comes together just absolutely beautifully. And there is an emotional core to this, right? Like, and what we're talking about, it's the Isherwood piece, is that we have a story here. The story has to follow these characters. So we follow Isherwood, who in the film is Brian, and that's Michael York, and
Yeah.
we focus on his relationship with Sally, who's largely just one chapter in the book, and ends up being a bit of a framing story. But what's amazing here is that story, there's a lot of depth to that and the characters you can talk about because we're spending time with those characters, but they don't necessarily have big arcs. He captures the same magic that Isherwood does, in terms of, look, here's the story, here's these characters, we're spending time with these characters, but when you pull back, the real story here is the time in Berlin and how times are changing, the geopolitics of the world and how it's affecting Berlin culture. Like that's one of the big takeaways, and I think that fascinates him. I think that this, the culture of the types of relationships that um, Sally and Brian and, is it Clive? Trying to
Yeah,
remember.
they're
Yeah. The rich guy, like they're a threesome for a little while. Just this.
Maximilian,
Yeah. Oh, Max. Right, right, right. See, I'm all mixed up on the character
Max.
names between the book and the movie. But yeah, so there's this seemingly just open relationship, and I think that there's an appeal to this, bohemian artsy lifestyle, with queer subtext. Actually, it's not subtext because, Brian says, "Oh no, I sleep with
Text
them too."
text.
It's text. It's actual text. So I think this probably parallels the Broadway scene a bit. So there's an appeal there to just these lives, right? And these young people exploring, themselves and finding a community where they can be accepted, because, 1960s in the United States is, fairly closed and conservative, but there was this space in Broadway where, people could, explore, and they work at night and they work in the arts, and, have a bit of a, free love environment. I think there's probably an appeal to these characters for Fosse, just with him having the last 20 years being on stage and around stage. I think that's part of it as well. Um, but also too, he wants to tell this story about um, how serious the world is, and I think he hits this absolutely out of the park. There's a choice in here he makes to have all the music is diegetic, so no one just breaks into song, because that's what we do in a musical. There are a bunch of songs here and they're showstoppers, uh, but they are all in the context of the club. And this is something I love about Bob Fosse as well, is that he was the master of coming up with a framing story. It's almost like, oh, I love what they do in with the interviews in Citizen Kane. I need to have something, just these little chapter stops for my story. So, um, And here,
Yeah.
that's how he employs the music. We've got these little stops in between the episodes with the characters, and these little stops are little stop-ins with the musical. So we do a musical number, and the musical numbers also reflect a couple things. They reflect maybe what's going on with the characters, but they also reflect the world of the club is reflecting the world of, changing times in Berlin. So it's very, very, very nuanced, and there's a lot going on. But in a way, uh, everything that happens in the Kit Kat Club doesn't really have much to do with the actual story. They're his chapter stops and these framing devices that he uses, and he uses interviews in Lenny. He uses just these little Roy Scheider showering and taking drugs and smoking. Those are the little snippets. Plus the interview with Death. That's what he uses, and all that jazz. This is how he breaks his story. So there's something with this musical that works just that way, that he vibes with, and because he builds his narratives off of framing devices, and it's brilliant. And then he can sort of build the beauty and the masterpiece of some of this choreography, like just the music in here for the exact type of music I would not sort of listen to and bop along with. It is absolutely phenomenal. It really is amazing, amazing stuff. And I am just enthralled with the MC character in this for some reason,
Hmm.
Joel Grey. And I think Liza Minnelli, who's a larger than life character, I think, in the real world, who I don't really have too much knowledge of, except for her work in this. But I think she's a standout, an absolute standout. So, but yeah, ramble, ramble, ramble. I'd love to hear your take on Cabaret.
This is gonna be an echo chamber of sorts, probably. But I love Cabaret. To the point that I would almost call it my favorite musical of all time, which is a shame because this has the reputation of being the musical for people who don't like musicals because of everything you mentioned. Like it's it's a simple story. It's set inside like all the music is diegetic. It's inside the club. That's usually why people don't like musicals really like Cabaret. It's very cinematic and everything. But I just think it's just I love musicals in general. But there's something about this one that always hits. It always works. I loved it the first time I watched it, almost like 8 years ago, I think, at this point, 7 or 8 years ago. And I love it on every rewatch. I've listened to the soundtrack countless times. I've rewatched specific scenes so many
Yeah.
times. There is something truly magnetic about this film. Um, for something that was so innovative in 1972 to still have this power and this hold on the new viewers, newcomers to the story is truly the stuff of legends.
Mhm.
In terms of like what I personally really like, to kind of add on what you said, because I share pretty much everything you mentioned, to be honest. Um, I have to say I'm a big fan, which already kind of like hit me a bit the first time I watched it, and just makes me happy every time I see it. Like for this to be for the time one of the only movies to have like an openly bisexual man at the center of it, in
Yeah.
a way that they could have easily cut out or hidden, and they actually like embraced it. They
Yeah.
go on with it. Um, I was listening to the commentary track on the Blu-ray, where the I forget the name of the expert talking about the film, where he mentions that apparently during that scene where Brian and Sally are having the confrontation, they
Stephen
were actually
Tropiano.
that's the one.
Yeah.
It was actually supposed they were actually supposed to say fuck, like use an F bomb,
Right.
um, but then they would have been a bit too pushy or too weird, so they also had them reset the line with screw, and they purposely acted it in a poor way, just so that they would not end up using that take and actually use the F bomb take, which they ultimately did not do in the editing room. So they have the
Yeah.
screw, oh, screw Maximilian, which always sounded a bit funny to me. It's like, screw him.
Yep.
I do too. But it's charming. It's charming. But that's something that always I was really liked. Um, but the other thing that I love about this musical, which kind of ties into the to kind of like keep it more focused on the book versus film comparison, is just how eerie it is.
Hmm.
It is loud and colorful. Some of those numbers, man, are gorgeous. There's, I want to say it's a shot during maybe this time where Liza Minnelli is singing. It's like a wide shot of the stage, and there's this blue light hitting her back, and it's
Hmm.
just casting the shadow and God rays all across the room of her silhouette. Oh man, there's
It's
like
so good.
paintings.
Yep.
Those are visual, like cinematic paintings, truly.
Like
But for a
Fosse
movie
was a
that's
genius.
truly
Yeah.
truly was a genius, but for a movie that's so colorful and full of energy and life, and the editing and everything, the humor, there's a lot of humor in this. It is very unsettling, just like the book, just like in Isherwood's story. The way that they have this rise of the Nazi regime slowly coming into the play. And I think what's something that's still impressive of this film that I find relevant to now is how you have this first opening number, right? It's the Willkommen one. So,
Hmm.
welcome to the cabaret. Leave your troubles outside. Here, everything is beautiful. Life is beautiful. You are, you, the audience, you, the viewers, are going into this movie. You go into a musical because you want to escape the harsh realities of life. You want to escape all the horrors of the world. Here, everything is beautiful. Even the orchestra is beautiful, right? You're just having fun. And you see those numbers, and they're just, jumping around, making very crude sexual jokes, slapping women's butts. All those things are happening. It's very joyful. It's very innocent, right? On the outside, though, you have like a man be beaten by a pulp. Like, I think that's like the bartender or the owner of the Kit Kat Club, whatever, because he just like kicked
Yep.
out a
Yep.
Nazi.
This is a
You
powerful
have
bit of cinema. Like honestly.
the intercutting is astonishing in that part. Um, you have, the entire menage a trois with Maximilian and Sally and Brian, that they're just so happy and joyful, like taking advantage of this rich man in a way. It was like buying their friendship, which is taken straight out of the book and is not present
Mhm.
in the play, which is something that I find very interesting. But then you also have in one of those moments, it's just, they're going by car through the streets of Berlin, and they see a dead body on the streets, and it's just like this tableau of violence, which is gorgeous and unsettling, and it feels like one of those passages from the book, right? Of
Yeah.
passersby just like looking down, shaking their heads. There's a dead body. It's not good.
Yeah, well, this is a particularly stirring moment actually because it is the three of them together. So this is Brian, Sally, and Max. So
Max.
they drive by, and there's a brief commentary because every once in a while Brian, just like Isherwood in the book, will just sort of share his thoughts or say something that sort of reveals his stance on things. And I think Brian asks him, "Okay, so what's going on?" And then Max, I believe, says, "Oh, well, these people get out of line, who, I don't know, a minority group, but then the Nazis will keep them in line." And Brian says, "Well, who keeps the Nazis in line?" "Oh, the German people." Right? So this is a telling comment. And then later on, after just this phenomenal scene where they go out to the countryside and they end up at just sort of a rural fair where a
A
song breaks
beer
down.
garden. A beer garden.
Yep. And when they're leaving, and the whole community has joined in singing this Nazi anthem, and allegiance is very clear. Maximilian and Brian, they leave, and Brian says, "Oh, you think you can control the people now?" And that is something else. So it's very, very uh, cleverly done, sort of these drops, right? And so this type of moment is tells a lot, but it does exactly what the Isherwood book does. right? It gives you a
Yep.
perspective because you see this little snippet from people watching. You see a result from people watching, or you're looking down the street and you see something happening in the background. And Cabaret does a phenomenal job of capturing just all these little things in the same spirit as the Isherwood text of being a camera. I'm going to document. I'm going to record. This is a journal entry. I'm a reporter. This type of attitude of distance away from the subject.
Yep.
Cabaret captures that beautifully. So through these characters, we see things happening in the background, or they pass by these things that are happening without them being in the middle of it. And then meanwhile, also at the Kit Kat Club itself, events sort of sneak into what's happening in the audience, and then the musical numbers themselves are sort of suggestive. You see, like the MC sort of transforms in a way, right? So, as if
Mm-hmm.
he's playing to the type of crowd that is out there, right? And this is sort of unsettling as an audience member. It's fun at the beginning and welcome, and but as the movie goes on, and you have this dance number where all the women are, they turn their bonnets around, and their bonnets look like helmets, and they
Yep.
start behaving like soldiers. This is a very, very powerful play with this song. So and the imagery, and this is the MC leading it. He's leading it for whoever's in the crowd, because you have more and more people with that type of hostile military pushback is okay in the crowd. So the attitude of society is the audience, and the MC plays it.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic. I gotta say, do you see David Lynch in the Kit Kat Club? I gotta think Lynch loved this
Club Silencio, kind of. Yeah, yeah,
to,
yeah.
to a bit. Like, and I always sort of thought that in Lost Highway, the Robert Blake character
Mm-hmm.
is sort of a play on the MC.
The MC. Joel Grey, I mean, terrific. Absolutely terrific in this film. Is borderline demonic. And
Hmm.
it's not even the way that he plays it, but the way that Fosse and the editor use him. I know, like, The Exorcist will come out 1 year after, but this almost feels sometimes like the Pazuzu jump scares, you know, where you just have like the face pop up in the frame in The
Hmm.
Exorcist, and they do something similar here, where just in some songs and in some parts, like it would just like during the Tomorrow Belongs to Me part sequence, like towards the end, like they're driving away, and there's just like this cut to a slow zoom of a reflection of the MC tilting his head up and looking into that reflection, which is just like I don't feel I don't
Yeah,
feel safe. I
yeah.
don't
Like,
like this.
and I
I don't
gotta
feel
think like
safe.
Lynch loved this, right? Like, I feel the Kit Kat Club. It's almost like the Black Lodge, right? It's an
Yeah.
otherworldly type of place. And insofar as, like a lot of
There's music
Lynch's,
in the air.
there's music in the
There's
air. Yeah, there you go.
there's the drapes.
You know, and Leland Palmer in Twin Peaks, of
Mm-hmm.
course, like one of the lead characters of the first season of Twin Peaks, um, is named after the actress in
Oh, right.
all
Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
that
All the
jazz,
jazz.
right?
You're
So
right.
I think that he was a big Fosse fan, and Fosse's influence people don't talk about it enough. But I think you don't have Michael Jackson in the way you have Michael Jackson in the '80s without
The
Bob Fosse's
gloves, man.
influence. But like this time when I watched this, I couldn't help but see, yeah, I bet you Lynch loved this stuff. The whole idea that life's going on normally outside, but if you look down into the weeds, there's grime in there, right? And that's a very Lynchian type of theme, and I think that's in here as well, right? Like, you see, like, oh well, it's polite society outside, and um, but you look under the covers, and there's a lot of dirt under the fingernails of these characters,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I just feel that in some ways, like, this is something that would have inspired Lynch in different ways.
I mean, you could totally write an article about how Cabaret is a stealth horror film. Like, it's secretly actually a horror film, which it
Hmm.
kind of is. And the most disturbing part of it is that it makes you fall in love with something dangerous, something like it makes you understand how you could fall in love with some of those things. We both touched on the "Tomorrow Belongs to Me" scene, which was written for the musical. Some people apparently believed it was an actual Nazi anthem that they put in. It wasn't.
It's
It
not,
was
right?
all
Yeah, no, it
made
is.
up.
Yeah, yeah.
It's in English, people. But anyway, but the way it's played out, like you're watching this, you're outside. It's a beautiful, gorgeous, sunny day in Bavaria. Oh, sorry, Berlin. In the beer garden. That's one of my minor nitpicks, by the way, is that like everything exterior was shot in the south of Germany, and it's very clearly
Mhm.
the south of Germany if you know Germany in any way, and people are dressed in typical southern clothes. It's like this is not Berlin or the countryside of Berlin, but it's fine. Um, but you just have this close up, and it's like the only scene in the entire movie where someone sings outside of the club,
Mhm.
and it's like this beautiful blonde boy, beautiful voice, just like singing, and the lyrics, they're kind of inspiring at first. People are listening, then the camera just slowly reveals who he actually is, and as the
Yeah.
lyrics go on, it gets more uncomfortable and more eerie, and it's just like, fuck, they got me. And then they do the same switch again later on. Probably my favorite song from the musical is the "If You Could See Her Through My Eyes"
Oh, like,
song.
I was going to say, like, again on the music, the tonally perfect. Like the
Yeah.
tone, that is a really tough tone to nail because it's cute, it's cheesy, but it's serious, it's dark, it's cheeky, like that. The tone of that song and is just, you know, spot on, and any one of a number of ways that could have
Hmm.
not played properly, or there's this punchline at the end, which uh is just jaw-dropping, really. um and
Well,
you literally have someone in a gorilla suit dancing around, like just the tone of that could go so goofy and
mhm.
miss, but it's just perfect.
I love the were the original writers of the musical who were they were talking in some of the featurettes I watched. They were talking about when they actually staged this on like Broadway and places, and the people who were watching it for the first time, like they get towards the end and they're ready to clap, and when they said she wouldn't look Jewish at all, they like kind of like kill the clap, like oh god, oh no.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's ultimately what Cabaret is as a musical. It's like, oh, it's the music, it's the song, it's it's beautiful, it's fun, it's light, it's fine. All of this is fine. There's nothing more to it. And we hear it so many times, especially now where, brain rot, internet discourse, there's no nuance, there's no nothing, which is something that's like the entire movie is so nuanced. There's no melodrama here. All of the drama hits because it's so subdued.
hmm,
Like Michael York and Liza Minnelli arguing is not this grandiose scene of shouting and throwing things. It's actually very restrained,
hmm,
especially when you get towards the end when it gets very serious. Like there's so many scenes of people just looking at each other and glances and close-ups. It's a movie. It's a mature movie. It's a movie for adults. It's a movie for a mature audience.
yeah,
Um, and today, like with all of this internet brain rot and this loss of things, like I hear it so many times where we're watching questionable content because some of those are not movies, some of those like the TikToks and the Instagram reels or whatever, where it's like you're Jordan Peterson or whatever. And it's really like it's fine, it's just good fun. It's just harmless, no one's getting hurt. This is fine. It's like, well, we should pretend something more and some more. I don't want to say everything has to be intellectual or clever or smart or whatever, but even like simple entertainment can be a gateway to something worse.
yeah,
Joe Rogan and those like
yeah, yeah,
podcasters and people, they built an empire on being harmless at first and slowly putting their propaganda in their messaging. And
yeah,
this is something that you see in this musical, which I think is brilliant because you're falling in love with the songs, you're falling in love with Joel Grey, with Liza, with everything, and you just see that it gets grimier. Even the club itself, right? It feels like it's slowly like rotting away compared to the opening. You get to the
yeah,
final scene, like all the dancers look tired. They're just playing like the slow motion shot of them playing, where it's like what the
yeah.
just like slugging along. You just feel gross. Just like,
Yeah.
ugh, where's the fun anymore? Like, where the troubles have to be outside, right? Instead, no, the troubles are here. The camera just that's a David Lynch shot, by the way. Now that I'm thinking about it, the final shot,
Hmm.
I was just like, the MC leaves, the light itself, like
Yep.
flashlight, whatever, like slowly moving. It's like,
Yep.
what's happening? This is like Inland Empire. It's like I'm scared. The distorted vision of the Nazis already in the club. The troubles
Yeah.
are here. You cannot tune
You,
out all of this. Like
you're
Otto in the
100%.
book.
Or alternatively, like he, slightly different, taken away the MC character, insofar as he's an imp and he's an unsavory character in his own right, but he's the leader of the entertainment. And as the audience changes, as the attitude of Berlin changes, as um, you know those who are in control of the society in Berlin changes, they end up being who populates the audience, which is, in the one of the very
Mhm.
final shots, we get that very disturbing look at who's in the audience. Well, they're Nazis. So where are your troubles now? Yeah, for the Nazis, the troubles are outside, and they are
Yep.
enjoying themselves. So you've got this, you know, really sort of grimy look at who's running the entertainment here. This MC character, he is a bit of a devil and an imp, and he is playing to the audience. He is playing to popular opinion. He is playing to whoever will keep him hired. Um, because where are your troubles now? Yeah, for the Nazis, the troubles are outside. All those rotten, Jews and minorities and gay people and all those people they hate, those problems are outside. In the Kit Kat Club, we will laugh at the minorities. We will
Mhm.
take jabs at them. So there's something sort of, sickening about the character of uh, the MC. And again, the tone, and insofar as this comes from the Broadway musical, was it Broadway first? I think it was.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so as well.
But insofar, like there's a lot of brilliance in just sort of devising this character to begin with. But I think that's probably a piece in here. That's sort of how I see him as, he's just playing to who's out there, and that makes him sort of just as bad. Sally is totally oblivious. She's young. She doesn't get it. Brian gets it, but he's sort of powerless. So every once in a while, he'll stand up to, like, he hears some rude comments in the boarding house. So he'll say, "Oh, there's another group of people out there that you must belong to, because you're a bigoted person. So, you're a horse's arse." Like, so he stands up, to one person, to one old guy. Um, so you get that opinion, but Sally's totally oblivious to politics. But the MC and the life of the club, there's a story in there. And this story sort of revolves around the entertainment starts to spin towards entertaining the prevailing power in the country. And that's gross.
Yeah, and even with the character of Sally, the way that she refuses to accept the reality of what's happening, she still wants to live in the fantasy, she still wants to live in the dream. I know that like Isherwood criticized the casting of Liza Minnelli. I know that diehard fans of the Broadway show criticize the casting of Liza Minnelli because she's just too good. She's like the character. Sally
Yeah, yeah.
Bowles is not the main. She's the main character essentially of the film. She's not the main character of the musical
Hmm.
itself, the stage musical. Um, she's supposed to be a bit cheap, a bit like not a perfect singer, very imperfect with blemishes here and there. But there is something. I mean, I'm happy that we have Liza Minnelli in the musical and she's great in the film. Um, but especially in the last song, during when she's singing Cabaret, which is a song that, yeah, you can just like again listen to the. Hey, it sounds nice, sounds happy. Sure, life is a cabaret. Come to the cabaret. If you're just listening to the lyrics of the chorus, but it's a like if you're actually listening to all of the lyrics, it's I don't want to say it's a borderline suicide note, but she's talking about, oh, I had a friend. She was drinking too much and she was always on pills. People hated her. She said she almost deserved it. You know, she was renting by the hour, but she was the happiest corpse I've seen. And when
Yeah.
I go, I will go out like her. So, you know, life is short from cradle to tomb. And enjoy life, enjoy the cabaret. And when she's saying this, she's not saying it with a beaming smile. She's saying it crying. Like
Mhm.
she has those gigantic tears almost bursting out of her eyes. It's heartbreaking. I don't know how anyone, and like before watching the musical a few years ago, I'd always heard this song without focusing too much on the lyrics, and it was always paraded as like this great song, and yeah, don't worry about your troubles, enjoy life. It's like it's grim. It's really, really grim, and I found it so moving. And then, yeah, of course, you go to the closing scene of the film. Um, it's I was listening to someone recently who was like, "Hey, if a movie makes me feel like shit by the end, it's a great movie."
I
And I
agree. If
always
Yeah,
I
that's
always
the
finish
standard of it.
Cabaret, and I'm like, yeah, Cabaret doesn't make me feel good, to be honest. I'm gonna be haunted by these songs for another week, probably, and I love
Yeah,
listening to them, but it's not a feel good musical. It's the opposite of a feel good musical.
100%. Um, Twice. This didn't happen any of the other times I watched this, but it happened twice. So during um, the Tomorrow Belongs to Us, like I felt emotional. Like I was swelling because I got the sense that there's a lot at stake right here, in this, and then also in the end in Minnelli's last song, Cabaret, like you feel it there too that it's gloomy, it's depressing, and God love this soul, like she's so lost, and we know what's coming, and like for a 19-year-old that, yeah, she's found her community, but that community is going to be all carved up. So what's going to happen to her next, right? So, she's
Hmm.
sort of lost. Where does she end up, right? Like, so she's got a period of hard knocks that's coming forward in her life at this point. Like it's dismal, and both of those numbers, like I felt like, oh my God, like this is really really sort of impacting me, right? When you think of it, and they're very very sad, right? And
Yep.
part of it is this sort of third person perspective that the Isherwood concept and I'm a camera concept, that's playing into it, but also this sense that we have of history, and even probably, like we're recording this, right after the United States decided to take down, the the government of Venezuela. So these things are happening in the periphery, um, and just to go back to that place where this did happen.
Hmm.
And my family and I, we were in Berlin in March, and a lot of what we did in Berlin, because the whole family was there. Like half the day we were at malls, but the other half we were at museums, and a lot of that is sort of reflective on this period in Germany's history, right? So World
Yep.
War II and leading up to it, and um, it impacts you, like I gotta say. So yeah, it's all in here if you choose to look, and if you don't choose to
Yep.
care, if you're Sally Bowles, then you can just sit back and enjoy a really cool ass new Hollywood version of a musical, and it's that too.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. And it's so. Speaking of Berlin, like side note on Berlin, Germany, right now. I remember I went to a museum. I don't know if I actually went there to the History of Germany museum.
No, I think that was on our radar, but no, we didn't get to that one.
That was a good one. Like they still have, maybe, I don't know. It was like a long term exhibit, but not like a permanent one, I believe, which is a shame. I think it should be permanent. Which was about like the history of Germany from the Berlin Wall up and like going backwards. It starts from the
Oh,
Berlin Wall, it goes backwards, and from the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989, goes back to, I want to say, to like 1818 or something like that. Basically showing like, hey, here's what happened in history. Here's what could have gone different.
Mm.
is what if this other thing happened, and like speculating by using facts and like everything that could have happened. And you get to the whole portion about Hitler and the rise of Nazis, and there is like the assassination attempt, the one that's portrayed in the Operation Valkyrie film with Tom Cruise, and like one of the things is like, hey, what could have gone different? What if he actually was killed in that bombing, for instance? Like, well, it was too late. It's like if he was killed, everything else would have still happened. Like the worst was it behind them, and when you go beforehand, like there was no way for him to not win the elections in the 1940s. The elections were rigged. You see
Mhm,
some of
mhm.
like there's even, I want to say it was like 1930. I don't know if it was 1933 actually, but like whenever they had the last elections where Hitler then became chancellor, he was the only person you could vote for, just like a
Yeah,
gigantic voting card. It's like one vote possible,
yeah.
just like one giant X here,
And
and
that's
that's
more or
it.
less like what Putin does in Russia, isn't it? Because they have elections.
Kind of like killing the competition. It's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, sure. Like there's no alternatives, totally. And what I found most frustrating, especially for a country like Germany and a city like Berlin, is that having this type of history, having this type of past, that you're so ashamed of, in a way. Like you're talking about it, you're showing it, but you're still feeling the shame. You're trying to make up for it. You're making up for it in the worst possible way in the past few years. It's unfortunate. Then you watch and read something like Goodbye to Berlin and watch Cabaret, and I think that's, unfortunately, I wish I could say this film is a product of its time. I wish I could say this book is a historic piece and it exists and it's great that it exists. Like, no, it's part of the cycle. And I
Mhm.
hate that we're part of the cycle. I hate that we are seeing history repeat itself. It's unavoidable. The two of us and the other people who care can learn from it, can use some of this knowledge in our own personal lives. But the people who actually can do something, unfortunately, are doomed to repeat history. So, just like, Cabaret, the film, we are ending on a downer note here.
Yeah.
But we're not done yet. We're not done yet. To hopefully uplift it a little bit, what's your favorite scene from the film, Randy? Just,
Oh,
just something happy, I hope.
oh, maybe not, but insofar as
I
great
love the
cinema,
beating.
great, great cinema, makes you feel something, right? So,
Yeah.
we said that earlier. Look, I'll have a couple, like, and honestly, like the tomorrow belongs to me. That is something else. And again, even in the edit, like you alluded to the fact, the way that this central vocalist is covered, right? So it's
Hmm.
it's it's beautiful, it's charming, and he's sort of an appealing presence. Then it slowly pulls out, and you see more people are engaged. Like the edit in here is, you've got so many different demographics. You've got a
Hmm.
young girl, you've got families, you've got so people are along for the ride and they're swept up in this. You
And
look
you
like
have
you're going to say something.
the elderly man
Yes.
who's just like sitting down and
The
shaking his head.
old guy
Oh God.
shaking his head, he's not standing up and singing, and this says something. It's like he's the guy saying, "God, we did this 20 years ago, and what did it
Yep.
get us?"
Yep.
And,
Yep. Yep.
he
Yep.
just yeah, like, his shoulders, I feel like they droop further. And there's a statement in that, and just the way that it pulls out, it's mostly close-ups, pulls out, everyone's involved, and you get close-ups to the different people. They're all different demographics, right? Like
Hmm.
the little girl, the older person, and and there's one really older guy that's not part of it, but you get a sense that no, um, Fosse with his camera is he's showing that no, this is like, yes, everyone's joining in and singing, so it's taking over that way. Germany, Nazi Germany is increasing and swelling that way. But also with his camera, it's pulling out,
Hmm.
covering more people, and they're all involved. It's just it's beautifully done. So that was one. Um, I do also like. I'm gonna do a couple here. I also really like the money song. I think it's
Ah,
just
yeah.
super charming, super fun. So there's the fun entry. But also just I'm a sucker for these little types of gimmicks. I love and I guess it's probably part of the framing thing, but I love the opening and the closing on just the shot of the MC and his face through this, goofy funhouse mirror almost. there's
Hmm.
just something with that. And in both instances, you see through that mirror the audience. And I guess maybe in a way, like you're seeing yourself, right? Like you're in the audience. So it's this mirror type of idea, but that just there's so much in that that, and you see the audience change. And that, yeah, it's a gimmick, but I adore it. I think that it's very revealing. It's just a fantastic little piece, and it's
Yeah.
just an illustration of how mature and focused Fosse was to telling a story with this medium that he was just getting used to.
It's I would say insane how well directed this movie is. Even the way he positions the camera throughout,
Mm,
it's never banal, it's never bland. Like I watch his movie, I mean, I hate that they say I watch his movies. Like I've only seen this and all that jazz. I need to finish his filmography. I think that's actually on my 2026 card.
okay.
Finish his filmography, because it's not a big one, unfortunately. Very unfortunately, but the way he makes it, like this is pure cinema, as the meme would say, because it's, even for the time, this is one of the best looking films. Those, man, like if I had to pick a scene, I don't know if I could pick just one scene as well, but like I love the montage of Brian and Sally falling in love,
Mm,
where you have those shots of just like they're looking at each other while reading and chuckling. There's no talking, it's just like a little stare. The back, like the upside down kissing on the
mhm,
side with the candle in the background. And similarly, like the close up of the three, like the two of them and Maximilian kind of like dancing and moving around in circle. There's just like this super up insane close up. Like it was almost a reference point for me, but very different shot. But they put it something similar in like Never My Love, my short
mhm.
film, where like you're watching it and you're just feeling the tension of these three faces so close to each other. And it's like it's so, like I don't know. It's also one of the sexiest films that has zero nudity,
Mhm.
barely any kissing, to be honest. But it's just so, from the clothes and the intimacy of the camera, which plays into the intimacy you see on stage, like the
Mhm.
visual intimacy. It's not just the wide shots, it's not just like all clean and tidy, you see the whole choreography. It's just the rhythm of it, the legs and the movements and the arms and the hands, like you mentioned, the snapping, and it's
But
glorious.
the intimacy and shooting around that, I think like that's a theme in here too, is people want to feel connected, right? So you get that in
Yeah.
the forefront story, and you get that with, the social story as well. Like people want to feel like they belong, and people want to have good lives, and people want to feel connected to a group. They want to, oh, we're struggling, times are bad, inflation is, going through the roof, and so if someone speaks to that, like there is connection there, like it's just in the same way, Trump connected with voters, like
Yeah.
he connected with them on their level to a point, and so did Hitler. Honestly, people want connection and they want validation, and this film shows that, and and suggests probably that you've also got to be sort of self-aware, and sometimes there's a time where you can't just sort of, oh, I'm connected with people and go with the flow. There's times you got to cut the cord.
Amen. Amen to that. Then it's time for the last question of this episode. After this conversation on both Goodbye to Berlin and Cabaret, which one do you prefer? I think it's also one of the rare instances where they're actually very different beasts. One is more of an
Mhm.
episodic novel that's covering many different characters in over 3 different years. The film is more focused on Sally and Brian, and it's just a musical, of course. So, what do you feel? How do you feel, despite the bias of
Yeah, it is totally a weird one there. It's because it is an adaptation, but through a couple other mediums. There's through a few
it's
way
like
stations
diluted
along the
adaptation.
way. Um, Look, I really like the Isherwood book. I'm going to choose the movie. I think just a lot of that is just sort of my uh, love of Fosse and just love of watching, his films, every new time you get something out of them. So that would be my choice, but it's not as if I want to throw Isherwood to the curb. In fact, I'm sort of jealous of the fact that you've read it twice, because I think that there is so much more that one would glean in going through this a second time. So I think that's, yeah, I'll definitely go with the movie. I think the movie also, just in the history of cinema, it's got a very, very specific and special place, because it comes at the sort of the turning point, the turning of the tide, where um, auteurs were sort of coming forward in the 60s and 70s, and
Hmm.
Broadway was moving from the stage to the screen, and there's all kinds of influences in there, and I think Fosse is sort of one that's under discussed at times. So there's just a lot going on with the film,
Yep.
period. So that for me is, a no-brainer. But this is a fantastic text, and it's so easy to read, um, even though you're not following events. It does play out like a bit of a tapestry, and then once you step back and you can see it all, you see how much there is to talk about in there. So many different conversations. And you're doing it without the benefit of a character arc, so to speak, right? You're just sort of getting
Yep.
a history lesson through people watching, and that's sort of fascinating in its own right. So I didn't really answer your question properly.
You
Sorry.
did, you did. No, in a way, I think the best way one could enjoy Goodbye to Berlin is that they treat it as a series of novellas, because all of the chapters, again, like we both said, like it's 6 chapters. I want to say they average around 45 pages each, more or less, depending on whichever
Mhm.
version you're reading of the book. They're not short per se, but they're not that long either. So if you treat each one as its own separate story, which the book actually, Mr. Norris Changes Trains, was originally supposed to be just one of those stories that he just expanded because he fell in love with the character and the intrigue behind it. Um, but I would also go with the film, honestly. Despite really loving the book, I think if anything, I would recommend one watches the film and then reads the book, because the book informs some of the characters more. It brings some interesting details to side characters in the film that don't get much screen time. They do get more screen time, like Florence Schroeder or Schneider in the film. She gets more screen time in the stage musical. She has like multiple songs and the whole love interest.
Mm.
She's basically the Natalia. They end up taking Natalia Landauer from the book. They put her in the film, and they actually kind of like switch her and have her fall in love with Butcher, I believe,
Hmm.
who's Jewish, and the two of them can get together and blah blah blah. It's sweet. It's sweet in the musical, but in the stage play, but stage musical. Sorry, um, but I love the film. I mean, we haven't even mentioned it. The movie is the most awarded film at the Academy Awards that didn't win Best Picture as well, or
Yeah,
something like that. It's like 8 wins on 10 nominations. The only ones it lost were Adapted Screenplay to The Godfather and Best Picture
yeah,
to The Godfather,
yeah,
which is also an excellent film to lose to.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating piece in Oscar history as well, because I always found it, like, if the supporting actors that year, see if I can remember them. I think it was James Caan, Robert Duvall, Al Pacino for Best Supporting Actor, Joel Grey, and Albert Eddie Albert for Heartbreak Kid. And just to have three actors from one film, and it being The Godfather, one of the new Hollywood, one of the sort of big page turning, era changing films, um, and Cabaret sort of beat them all. Like, it's fascinating. And with this character, this was a topic of discussion a bit when we chatted about it on Uncut Gems, just how the Joel Grey character, it seems like this flimsy character to win, but I think there's something to it, because this character you've never seen before, and there's the musical component, and there's so much going on with this character on top of just sort of the theatrics and the makeup. So I'm yeah, that's another piece. And uh, oh, and the other thing with the Oscar history here is Bob Fosse that year won a Grammy. No, maybe it wasn't the Grammy. No, yeah, he won an
Yeah,
he won an Emmy, a Tony, and an
and an
Oscar that
Oscar.
year.
Yeah,
So he doesn't have an EGOT, but he won all three of those in one year for different projects. So yeah, this it's a phenomenal piece of just sort of history, even on the trivia level. But uh, yeah, yeah. Again, I could talk
it's a
about Cabaret for a
masterpiece.
while. Yep.
Masterpiece for good reason. For good reason. And on that note, this brings us to the end of our conversation on Cabaret, unfortunately. But of course, you can still listen to the good Randy Burrows on the Uncut Gems podcast. Why don't you talk to us a little bit, Randy? What are you doing in 2026 for
Yeah,
Uncut Gems together with the good Jakob?
absolutely. So, yeah, you can listen to Jakob Flash and myself on the Uncut Gems podcast. It's a weekly show, and you can grab it anywhere where you listen to your podcasts. We also have a Patreon channel, so you can find our episodes there at patreon.com/uncutgemspod. And this year in 2026, we are doing all 80s. So that's on our Patreon and on the main show. 1980s films. The only exception is on our Patreon, we are doing a monthly series talking about Mike Nichols. So we're well into the 90s in that series. So that's happening, and yeah, we've got monthly themes. So in January we talked about fantasy, 1980s fantasy. So lots of great conversations. So yeah, you can check us out there, or you can track me down on X or Blue Sky at Randy Burrows, and you can check out my new book, which came out a few months ago, The Top 2%, and you can order that from any online book retailer worldwide, or you can get it from bookstores in Atlantic Canada. So that's what's going on with me.
Exciting, exciting. I'm a proud owner of that book. It's like
Thanks,
nicely
man.
sitting on my on my bookshelf up top. Um, Meanwhile, you can follow me everywhere at NikiGra97. You can watch my short films and videos on YouTube and Vimeo at Enjoy the Movies. And of course, you can follow this podcast on Instagram at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod to stay up to date with all new and upcoming episodes. Stay tuned because the next one will be a solo episode by me talking about Stephen King's The Body and the Rob Reiner adaptation Stand By Me. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, we hope you have a lovely, lovely day. Leave your troubles outside and enjoy your evening. Adieu.